Thank you all so much for joining us. And apologies for the delay. So now I would like to introduce the speaker for today, one of them, Walid from UNICEF. Walid, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Paula, and thank you everyone for attending. I'll be very quick in giving you a brief over on UNICEF and what's UNICEF's mandate and how we do perform work not only in the Gulf area office, but also worldwide. So I will start going with the presentation. So if we can just start moving on with the presentation, please, Paula, the second slide, if you don't mind. Yes. So I'm going to talk about UNICEF's role. Basically, we are mandated to advance the rights of the children at all ages. We start from the birth to the adolescence age. We're talking about 21 and 22 of years old. Then, based on this mandate, we have been able to, throughout our journey as UNICEF, we have been able to push for the Convention of the Rights of the Child. It's an international agreement that has been signed in 1998, where most of the countries had been able to make a historic commitment to support the children's world with a lot of advantages and rights. This has helped governments and inspired them to change their laws, encourage investments from the private sector to support children in various interventions such as education and health. And also this enabled children to put their voice and make their voice more louder. Also, as UNICEF, if we're going to move to the third slide, sorry. We put a lot of efforts on the Convention of the Rights of the Child, as we just mentioned. It has more than 54 points that are mentioned here, and I'll leave it to my colleagues to talk further about it. Also, as part of the UN goals, we are very much into the Sustainable Development Goals. By 2023, we are trying to achieve as much as we can from these goals, of which UNICEF has 12 of the 17 that always focuses on its interventions and services that it provides to children. We move on to the other slide, and would like to say also that as part of UNICEF, we organize our work around five goal areas. We make sure that every child is protected from violence, from exploitation, from abuse. We also make sure that we provide the learning and the skills required for their children's future. We make sure that they are included in social protection and live a free of poverty life. We also make sure that they are safe and they live in a sustainable climate and environment, and also they thrive and survive. Quickly, just to move on to where is UNICEF now in the world? We are available in more than 150 country offices. We have more than 30,000 employees worldwide. More than 80% of them are in our field staff. We are available in the Gulf area in 5 countries. We cover Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, UAE, and Qatar also. And also our head office in the Gulf region is based in Saudi Arabia. What do we work on in this region? We work on accelerating national early childhood development policies. We also strengthen the child protections programs. We also work on improving availability and quality of data, and also leverage partnerships and for resource mobilization for these children. Quickly, after our presence in the GCC, what do we focus on as UNICEF? We will focus on interventions that cover WASH, immunization, socioeconomic support, nutrition, education, health, child protection, and social inclusion. We also would like to also say why we are doing this and what have we been doing for the past years. It's just to highlight in a small slide that our achievements as UNICEF that we are modestly proud about. We have been able to improve drinking water since 1990 for children by 91%. These are children that fall under our mandate or UNICEF has been able to reach out to. We have been able to decrease maternal mortality by 45%. And this is part of why UNICEF focuses on its work and makes sure that there's impact in what UNICEF does for all these children worldwide. As part of also having impact, we also make sure to be able to achieve a proper and positive impact. We include innovation in our work. If we may just skip 2 more slides because I skipped 2 others, Paula, if you don't mind. Yes, 1 more, please. Yes, and one another. Yes, great. So quickly, just to talk about UNICEF's interventions and innovations in that part, we have been able to do improvise or create something called an oxygen plant. It's a mobile oxygen plant. This has been used previously to treat 100 children with severe pneumonia, and during COVID, it was readapted to support 50 children who were diagnosed with COVID. Also, we do use AI for environmental purposes and challenges. We have a warning system for groundwater, and also another AI model to predict the air quality in areas where children are much more affected with the air pollution. We also have something which is very innovative. It's called the LP, the Learning Passport. It's an online, mobile, and offline tech platform that enabled children, especially during COVID, to pursue their education. And this was launched in Egypt in 2020, along with something called a school in a box. You can, this is something really nice that you can check over the internet. It's a box that has all the stationery and all the material that 40 children need, and one teacher would require to cover the period of 3 months of stationery and material and studying material. Moving on to the children's challenges as of today, as of 2030, we're talking about COVID, which has still sometimes in certain areas worldwide striking people. Also, the global economic crisis due to latest conflicts worldwide. We're talking about the increasing humanitarian needs and the people who are in need. We're talking about climate change and the natural disasters that are taking place, and also how much we are falling behind of achieving our 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. And this was one of the focuses that has been mentioned in the latest UN General Assembly in 2023 by the Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Also, if we can go deeper just into more what we can do for children. I'm just going to quickly go over it. We can support in climate action. We can also reimagine education in a better way to support children. We can develop early childhood development. We can work, on enhancing early childhood development phases, nutrition, and others. Quickly to move on the partnership with UNICEF, and this is the important part where it goes also into the family-friendly policies. Why we at UNICEF look forward to partner with the private sector, public sector, and other stakeholders within the society. We always try to ensure and make sure that our staff, who are expert staff, make a great impact on the ground for these people and for these children who need our support. We lead and pioneer on several innovations, as we just mentioned a while ago. We take work to scale. We don't work only on a wide level of scale. We go into communities. We go into even smaller communities to make sure that the support is reached to everyone. We meet needs throughout the journey of these children. When, as we mentioned at the early stage of this presentation, we start supporting children from birth till adolescence. And also one important thing for UNICEF, since we have a dual mandate of a humanitarian and developmental support, we are there before, we are there during, and we are there after an emergency. We don't just respond to emergencies. We are already existing there, since we have 150 plus country offices, and we are present in more than 190 countries worldwide. So when we talk about working with the private sector, we also talk about the philanthropic activities and the corporate social responsibility. We all know that the previous model or previous modality of working philanthropy was the good old philanthropy, but now everything has been shifting and changing towards more of a shared partnership value. And that's what we are trying also to highlight as UNICEF, is when we form and forge new partnerships with private sectors, we make sure that this is a shared value and not only one side's win support. Also, while working with the private sector, this does not only exclude other existing counterparts or stakeholders within the community. We're talking also about the civil societies. We're talking about civil communities. We're talking about the government and also the rules and regulations within the government, and also other businesses. And that's why when we establish these partnerships, we focus on several parts, which are the core assets, the expertise, the innovation. We focus about funding, because with funding and financial support, we are able to do the impact. We also focus about advocacy, and also we talk about business practices, of which one is the FFP, which is the family-friendly policies, the child protection, also the quality and evidence to also gather the data that's needed. Quickly on this, what's the partnership framework for the corporates with UNICEF? As we said, we work on achieving social and humanitarian change. We make sure to increase as much as we can financial support to vulnerable children and women who are in need. We inspire and unite donors locally and globally to support a certain cause. And we build also an outreach and develop the outreach not only on a national level, but regional level and global level. Quickly, a quick model on how do we work. We love to give you an example about Lego. Lego is one of the main partners for UNICEF. We don't have just a financial partnership with Lego. We have a multifaceted partnership that supports on certain technical collaboration and in-kind support. For example, there's also the financial support component. We also work on global advocacy, raising awareness, and also on children's rights and business practices with Lego. A quick view on who are our partners worldwide. We're talking about, for example, in the region, we're talking about DP World, Qatar Charity, Educated Child in Qatar. We're talking about Philips, Lego is there, IKEA, and other partners. And we look forward to also have more partners to support children worldwide. Thank you very much. And I leave the floor to our colleagues to also share their presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Walid.
So I'm Erica Strand. I'm our Chief of Social Policy for our Gulf office here based in Riyadh. And I'm just going to give you a quick overview of a study that we're doing. We have been conducting a study on family-friendly policies in the Gulf. And then we learned of the interest of the American Chamber of Commerce in its discussions with other parts of UNICEF about family-friendly policies. So we thought we could join forces and take this opportunity to just give you a brief introduction. So if you want, we'll go to the first slide. So the reason we decided to do this study, we saw that with COVID-19, there was a real crisis for children, for families and for children. I think we all experienced that on some level. So of course, there were issues and concerns at the level of the economy, at the highest level, the context, but also the policies, obviously the healthcare systems, the education system. And then as we go dig further down, the outcomes we see were at the child and the family level. So the world around the child is a prism through which the impact of social changes are lessened or intensified. And that's really important because when we talk about family-friendly policies, the reason it's so important to strengthen families and provide them with these policies is precisely because what the child experiences is changed so much by the support and resources the family has. So we'll go to the next one, please. We also have a lot of new evidence on child development. So we know that there are a lot of capacities that are prerequisites to child development in terms of cognitive development, mental health, physical health, social behavior, basically everything, every part of a human being's development takes its roots in early childhood, sometimes even from the pregnancy. And we see evidence from this in the earliest ages. So we know now how important it is to protect and promote early childhood and family policies, because these will improve the child's life chances and really allow them to be their best selves and attain, the highest level of productivity, if you look at it from an economic point of view, but also happiness and fulfillment. It'll also maximize the education systems because the children who are more prepared and have a more solid foundation in the early years are able to do better in school, socially, and all the ways that are important. So we'll go to the next one. And you see, we've kind of lined these up here. There are different capacities that are developed at different ages. So just to mention a few, this is not exhaustive, and there are tons of things that are developed at all points in the life cycle. But in terms of the infant, really learns listening, empathy, and inquiry. That's sort of the very most basic introduction of those capacities. And then as you have a toddler, it's discerning patterns, embodying, observing, reflecting, relaxing, sensing. So all of this, these types of developments. And then as they become a small child, it's fluency in ideation. So they're able to articulate an idea, divergent thinking. So they're able to have, contradictory ideas and thoughts and understand that, self-regulation, effective empathy, and intuition. So we see how important all of those pieces are in building the person who will emerge as an adult later on. Go to the next one, please. Okay, so based on those reasons, sort of our new understanding of neuroscience and child development and the hit that families took during COVID, here in Saudi Arabia with the government, we were interested in kind of taking the pulse and seeing how family-friendly the policies are in this region. The countries had to opt in the GCC to participate. So obviously Saudi Arabia was on board as they financed part of it and initiated this, but then Kuwait also joined us, as well as Qatar. So the study will now be of these, that it's underway, and it will be of the 3 countries. You can go to the next one, please. Great. So the objectives of the study, they're kind of 3 different pieces. So one is looking at the legislation and family-friendly policies in each country. So we're looking at the policy or government level nationally for the most part. And when we're talking about family-friendly policies, we're really talking about parental leave, infant care, flexible work, parenting interventions. Sometimes there are child benefits, so you receive a certain amount of money for having children or for each child in your family as sort of like a monthly transfer or stipend. Sometimes there are tax breaks. There can be case management, so social workers involved for certain children or families, monitoring systems, and access to childcare. So it's this whole composite of policies. And then we look at, in other countries, all the existing research and studies on these types of policies and where they've been able to discern a direct impact on things we care about, such as child well-being, could be nutrition, could be psychosocial development, could be school readiness, things like that. And then finally, how do we get there? We need to decide which of the countries that we have studies for, where studies have been undertaken that are of high enough quality, which of those are similar enough to the environment in the Gulf countries that they may provide us with some useful information and useful case studies that we can then build on to generate some recommendations for each of the 3 countries. So we can go to the next one, please. I'm going to go just into a tiny bit more detail. So in terms of the literature, when we talk of this global database of studies that we're going to use to see, because sometimes we think, oh, if we create more childcare, we'll have better outcomes. Well, this may depend on where the childcare is placed or the quality. So we need to really look at the details in the actual studies and their results. There was a 3-step quality assurance process. So the studies had to be conceptually coherent, they had to be methodologically valid, and they had to be scientifically valid. So it had to be empirically tested and correctly interpreted in all the quantitative aspects. So only studies that met these 3 thresholds were included in the global database. And then the ones that were included, an entry was created with its methodology, what type of program it was, who were the beneficiaries, what were the results. So that database was created globally, and this drew on over 26,000 studies, if you can believe it. So the researchers went through, applied these quality checks, and included 246, because only 246, if you can believe it, met those 3 quality criteria. And then their entries were generated so that we can use those for contexts that we decide are most relevant to the GCC. If we can go to the next one, please. And this one, I don't want to go too much into detail, but again, this maps out on top, you have the age of a child, and then you have sort of the way that a government might look at it, the sort of sectoral policies, cash benefits, education, human services, and health. So those are largely kind of 4 buckets that we put these policies in, and you can see the different policies and what age group they pertain to. There's a lot of overlap. And then, there are certain years that have fewer policies. Like you can see at age 6, for example, you'll have primary school, but you'll have less maybe cash benefits generally, or health programs. So that's just kind of a conceptual overview of the types of policies that we included when we mapped each of the 3 countries' policies. And we'll go to the next one, please. And this is just, I think this is the last slide. This is just where we are at in the process. So far we've created that database that has the 246 high quality and very robust studies that can be used and that show some impact of, or sometimes, can be positive, can be negative, or no impact, but that have tried to measure the impact of these types of policies on outcomes we care about, as well as a database of indicators that's global, so that we can say, okay, let's look at countries, the studies that exist for countries that have a similar female labor participation rate, for example. So there's a global indicator database. And the next step will be expert interviews or group discussions with officials in each country to fill some of the data gaps we have on the mapping we did of their programs. Once that's finalized, we hope to have the final policy recommendations and publish the study in the first half of 2024. And the reason we thought this might be of interest to you all is because we'd love to find some way to formalize or seek your feedback from actors in the private sector on their experience in Kuwait and the other 2 countries in time, to ask whether the policy recommendations we generate make sense from the point of view of the private sector. And we also, could be the same opportunity or a different opportunity to open a space for private sector actors to kind of express what they see as the greatest challenges to creating more family-friendly policies in the workplace, in the presence of government officials who may be able to act on those recommendations. So that's it. Thank you very much. I know there'll be some Q&A later, so I'll wrap up now so that we can finish the presentations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Erica.
Thank you so much, and it's really a pleasure to meet you all. My name is Chris. I'm with UNICEF. I'm based in HQ in Geneva in our program group, and I specialize on engaging with the private sector on how can we strengthen impact and results for children. So thank you, Walid, for the introduction to UNICEF. Thank you, Erica, for the broader view on what's happening in the region, particularly with the public sector. So what we really want to also use the time for today with you, of course, is to talk about the role of the private sector within this, and what does family-friendly policy mean to companies, and what are the actions that companies can take. So really presenting this as opportunities for the private sector to support parents and caregivers in the workplace and at home. If we can go to the next slide. So you probably gauged this already from the presentation so far. So when we talk about family-friendly policies, it's a very broad and sometimes also loose term that we define as all those measures that really help parents and caregivers to balance and reconcile work in the family and work at the workplace. So it's not just about sort of balancing those responsibilities, but it's also about the measures that benefit families and that benefit employers if they implement them. If we go to the next slide. So we at UNICEF for many, many years have been calling for family-friendly policies, both to the public sector, but also to the private sector, and in particular, gender-sensitive family-friendly policies, but also inclusive family-friendly policies. So really policies that reach the majority, or if not all workers, and especially those who are most in need. The reason we as UNICEF, as a child rights organization, call for family-friendly policies is because we know that the working conditions for parents, and there's lots of evidence out there and research and studies done, that the working conditions for parents, our caregivers, are really linked to the health, to the well-being, and the development of their children. So in order to improve outcomes for children, we also have to work with employers, with the public sector. How can conditions in the workplace be improved. And we will go through some of those details. So just as a recap, it's a call to governments to invest in this, but also to really to businesses to see what they as employers can do to support parents and families and children more broadly. If we go to the next slide. So what are the key asks to governments and businesses? We started initially a few years ago with 4 core asks, and many of them will be, I think, very familiar to you. The first is around paid parental leave. So both maternity and paternity leave, so that when parents have children or caregivers look after children, that they have a legal entitlement to take time off. There's international standards set by the ILO, what the minimum should be. They're quite sort of the basic, the lowest common denominator, but in many parts of the world, governments now go beyond that and offer, again, parents and caregivers more time to really be able to look after the children and not having to return to work. But there are huge gaps globally. It really differs by region. So this is still a very, very important area of work where we see some progress, but certainly not enough. The second is around support for breastfeeding mothers. So those mothers who return to work after giving birth, that they have the ability, if they want to, and they are supported to continue breastfeeding, whether it's exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months or whether it's complementary breastfeeding, a workplace environment in which women are enabled, supported, if they choose so, to continue breastfeeding. This is a very important ask because we know that in many parts of the world, one of the reasons why women may stop to breastfeed is because they have to go back to work. And the workplace does not provide a supportive workplace environment where women can reconcile both working and breastfeeding. The third is around affordable, accessible, and quality childcare. Erica also alluded to that. So really, of course, an ask to the public sector to invest in a childcare infrastructure, a public childcare infrastructure, but also the private sector, who has also opportunities to support access to childcare, whether it's providing childcare themselves or whether it's through referral programs or vouchers or other forms, how employers can support their employees to access quality childcare. And the last is around adequate wages that really supports also the families. So really taken into account when parents have caregiving responsibilities, and also child benefits, which is more of a government ask, as Erica mentioned, which is around sort of cash transfers or other forms forms of payments to families or to parents for their children. If we go to the next slide, this was sort of the initial 4 key asks that we're still very actively promoting as UNICEF with many allies. But of course, we've also expanded that over time, especially in the context of COVID. So I won't go into the details here again, but just to also show, we're looking also at family and sick leave now, especially, after COVID, where employers increasingly also are providing, either because they're legally required to or because they see the business benefit, are providing opportunities for parents to also take time off, pay time off when their children are sick or when they have to look after elder family members. So very important. Also, flexible work is something, of course, that has become very, very relevant in the context of COVID and beyond, where parents are more flexible also to, for example, work from home or have more time flexibility. In essence, we structure those different asks around 3 dimensions, which we see as critical to support parents. It's around time, so that parents have the sufficient time to look after their children. It's about resources, so that they have sufficient income and monetary support to look after the families, and around services, for example, and childcare. And again, all 3 dimensions, in our view, and based on our research, they really support workers to reconcile work and family life. We know that they advance the well-being and the development of children, but we also know, and we can talk a little bit more about this, they really promote business sustainability and productivity. So there is a strong business case that we see in many parts of the world for employers to invest in these different dimensions. Could we please go to the next slide? Just a global, quick, very snapshot, just to throw out some data here. I'm going beyond your region. Globally, there's the ILO estimates that there's about 650 million women that do not have adequate maternity protection. So meaning when they become pregnant, they don't have the right protections. When they have a baby, they don't have the support that they should have. So that's about 1 in 3 women globally of reproductive age. So really a huge challenge still globally to make sure that women are enjoying the rights that they are entitled to by international law, and the opportunities also for public and private to really address that gap. 75% of unpaid care work globally is performed by women. So that means that women perform 3 times more unpaid care work than men. This is a global statistic. This is very, very different in some parts of the region. In some parts of the world. In some regions, this could be as much as 5 or 6 times, where women do it 5 or 6 times as much as unpaid care work as men. So it's a global average. Another interesting statistic from the ILO is that there's a huge gap between, they call it a childcare policy gap, between the time that when parents finish their paid maternity or paternity leave. So this can really vary in some parts of the world. Parents can take up to a year or even beyond after having a child, but in other parts of the world, this is much, much shorter. So the gap is between that, when that time ends, and when they have access to free and universal early childhood care or education or mandatory primary school. So 4.2 years where parents in many parts of the world do not have a support system in place. So they have to work and they have to look after the children, or they have to pay for private daycare. In the Gulf region, or particularly yes, I think the statistic for the Gulf region I saw, it's about 6 years. So there's a huge gap between the time, again, where parents have to go back to work and when they have access, at least to a universal and a free either childcare support system or primary school. Quickly going to the next slide. I'll wrap up a bit. I'll be a bit faster so we have time for discussion. If we, again, this is, I think I mentioned that it's really important we see family-friendly policies as a win-win. It's very beneficial for children. There's really no doubt about that. It's about health and nutrition, social and emotional development, readiness for school. It also has impacts in some parts of the world to reduce the risk and likelihood of child labor. Importantly, again, also for parents themselves, it's of course very, very beneficial. It improves their personal well-being, their work-life balance. We know that this is a key pathway to get women into the labor market. So we know that lack of access to childcare, for example, or parental leave support is a major hindrance for women in many parts of the world to be able to access the labor market, even if they want to, because they have to look after children. It reduces poverty, it improves parenting skills, and just generally improves the overall well-being of families. Importantly, maybe for this audience on the next slide, there are also major benefits for businesses. I mentioned that. And again, there's many studies out there that show that businesses investing in these policies also brings a benefit to them in terms of higher retention rates or keeping employees. We know that if the parental support system is weak, that there's a much higher likelihood for employees to leave when they have children, which is not a surprise. I mean, that's complete, makes sense. Less absenteeism, there's a positive impact on profitability. It's easier to attract talented workers and to also improve the worker relations. So if you have a more beneficial support system for parents, of course, you're also a more attractive employee. And there's also good studies that show how does this improve the performance of businesses and productivity. We don't have the time to go into the details, but we can maybe share a bit of if there's interest, a reading list or resource list after this webinar, because there's a lot of work happening in this space, not by UNICEF, but many other parts that are also looking at the economic case for investing in family-friendly policies. And just on the next slide, very briefly, if you take it one level up, even beyond looking at individual companies, I'm sorry, if we go one slide further, one more, and for economies, exactly. So it's not just again businesses at the micro level, but also at the macro level for economies. And we know that there's a case also from a macroeconomic point of view to invest in childcare, for example. Again, this is statistics from the ILO, which is very recent, came out just a few weeks ago, but it shows that companies that invest governments that invest in childcare, there is also an economic benefit over time because, I mean, for many reasons, but one of them being that you increase female labor market participation, for example, you increase productivity. So if you look at the data here, for every dollar invested, on average in the world, the ILO estimates that there's a $3.76 return on your investment. If you look at the Arab states, it's somewhere around 3.5. So it's really also for governments a strong case to say we need to invest more in paid parental leave, we need to invest more in childcare and other support systems. Very quickly, if we go back one slide, I thought this was a very interesting example from Egypt that our colleagues shared, where businesses, employers were asked, what do you see as the benefit of providing affordable childcare benefits and services to your employees? So this was a study that UNICEF was involved with the government, the ministry, but also the ILO and the Egyptian Business Federation. They asked more than 400 businesses, and these are some of the responses that came from them. It expands the talent pool, so more talented employees to hire. It improves gender diversity in the workplace. It reduces absenteeism, turnover rates, boosts productivity, and improves the work environment and employee satisfaction. So everything I already said before, but it's interesting to really also hear that from businesses that have invested in that and say, look, there's actually really a strong case. If we go maybe one or two slides forward, just a quick snapshot here. I mean, we talked about paid parental leave. It's really, really important family-friendly policy. And in some parts of the world, the laws have become much more generous and they're much more supportive. But in other parts of the world, that's not the case. And what we see is that businesses are actually stepping in to address that gap. I mean, the US is a well-known case where there's no national standard for paid parental leave. So it depends on the state where you're working. You might have some entitlements to paid parental leave, but that's really not the same across the board. So some companies are stepping in and saying it is in our own interest to pay our parents for time off after they had a child. So Lego is a classic case that developed a global standard a few years ago that said, wherever you work for Lego, it doesn't matter in which country, what the law is, we will provide you with the minimum of paid parental leave, 26 weeks for primary caregivers and 8 weeks for secondary caregivers. So, and we see more examples there where companies are really seeing that, we want to attract the best talent that we can, and we want to give them a very supportive environment. And they're setting their own standards that in many parts of the world go beyond what is required by law. Another quick, another snapshot, and then I think I'll wrap up. If we go to the next slide. Similar on childcare. I mentioned that, there's a strong economic case at the macro level, but also businesses seeing the value. There's been some work done by organizations that work with the private sector to really look at what is the return on investment. And there's this sort of famous case of Patagonia in the US that have their own on-site and crash. So they really invested in their own infrastructure and making sure that the children of their employees have access to childcare. And they were able to really recuperate 91% of the cost that they had to invest when they compare that to the lower turnover rate, so that people would stay in the company because they have access, their kids have access to childcare. And when you look at the cost of what it costs to replace employees, there's different statistic. It depends on where in the world, but it's significant. I mean, the time to train people, to get them on board up to speed, it's a major cost. So by providing those support systems, they could really show that they can recuperate most of those costs. I believe, in the interest of time, if we can just go to one or two last slides, and then I really stop because hopefully we have some time for discussion. So what does that mean? If you go one slide back, sorry. Yes. So really, what does that mean for businesses? I mean, this is probably the question that I'm sure many of you will have. We have a lot of resources at UNICEF. We're of course very happy to share them with you. They are not specific to your region. They're global, but they might still have some useful messaging. Where do you start? If you say as a business, okay, this actually sounds good, but we're not really sure what we should do. So there are a few principles that are important to us. One is really to look at what do your workers and your employees need. So what are their preferences? So doing sort of surveys, assessments, engaging with them to understand where are the current gaps? What is that the workers need? So that's a really, really important first step, to understand what are the family needs and where can employers step in and provide more. And then really looking at sort of a gap assessment and looking at, okay, this is maybe where we fall short of international standards or where we could do more, and then integrating some of those provisions into your HR policies or your sustainability policies, and really looking at how does this make a difference. It also requires engaging, across the company, training, awareness raising, both with management and sort of HR, but also with workers themselves, to see, are they availing of those services? Are they actually aware of that they have these benefits and entitlements? Monitoring results is very important, to look at, are these policies having the desired impact and effect? Is it really working? But then also, once employers become more family friendly and they really spearhead that, using that voice and influence to also encourage others, business partners, peers, but also policymakers, to really join the journey. We need more allies in that sense. We need more organizations that step up and say, we invest in this space and we want others to follow suit. And often policymakers do follow suit. We see in many cases now where companies might spearhead certain trends, or they implement something that then governments realize, okay, this also needs to be regulated to level the playing field. Sorry, very briefly, last slide. This is just going in a bit more detail. If you do decide to work in the space, a top level commitment is really important, from a sort of CEO level or C level, towards gender sensitive, inclusive, family friendly policies. So we realize that when we work with companies, those that really have that drive from the top, that's very important. Implementing the right management systems, to really make sure this is also not just a sort of an empty commitment, but there is actually process to follow up. I mentioned this already, monitoring and evaluating the impact of FFP, but also collaborating with others. No company needs to do this in isolation. There are organizations that are supporting companies in this journey, and then sort of, again, advocating and championing good practices. On the right side, you see, again, just as a recap, what are the sort of the issues where this would be important. It's paid parental leave, it's family and sick leave, it's breastfeeding and nutrition support, access to quality childcare, flexible work, living wages, income protection. So just sort of throwing out a few keywords there again. Worker-centric is important, gender-sensitive is important, and inclusive, meaning that it really reaches the workers that are most in need. And that's not just the employees, the full-time employees, but it's ideally also those other workers a company may engage with, whether they're contract workers or part-time workers or sort of non-traditional forms of employment. I'll stop here. I'm sure that there are many questions and maybe some feedback. So thank you very much from my side.
Thank you, Chris. And now for the questions, if you guys can type them please on the chat if you have any questions for any of the speakers, and we will moderate. Okay, one of the questions that we did get is if you could kindly provide the benefits of investing in parental friendly policies. Is there somewhere where people can find that easily?
Yes, I mean, we have it at the high level. We could go back to the slide that I was showing. So we know from research that paid parental leave is very important. It's perhaps arguably one of the most important demands from many workers in many parts of the world. So if companies do implement that they are able, again, to attract more talented workers, they're able to keep them. So the cost that you will have as a business to paying for that, unless the government steps in and pays for that, which is the case in many parts of the world, where it's actually not the employer that has to pay for it. They may pay for the initial period, but governments do cover those costs. But the cost can be offset really by keeping those workers. And if you compare that to the cost of hiring new workers because people leave, there is a real business case there. We do have some, not UNICEF, but there are some studies there. I can take note, and maybe after the webinar, we can share one or two links of where organizations have done that assessment. So looking at the cost, which it is initially, it certainly is more expensive for companies to sort of pay their workers for a longer time to be away. But that is many times offset by the benefits of keeping the workers and attracting talented workers.
Thank you, Chris. And in terms of guidance for this types of policies, is there a separation between how large the entity might be? So, for example, you might have some entities that have thousands of employees, like Lego, whereas you might have a small entity that might want to practice some of these, but it is expensive.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So we do have a lot of guidance as UNICEF, but there are also other organizations that either have guidance or are able to support companies in this journey. We have a handbook on family-friendly policies that we can share. We have sort of key messaging around this topic. And we don't go into the level of, how does it look different to smaller companies? So it's more generic messaging to the private sector. But a lot of those asks would be equally applicable to smaller companies. Of course, it's different. Absolutely. If you're H&M and you have 148,000 employees globally, it is very different to perhaps a smaller company that only operates in one country. But the mechanisms or the principles behind it are very similar. If you have a smaller workforce and you decide to support access to quality childcare, it also means less work. I mean, you might be looking at a few sites where you operate, or you might looking at working with a few local authorities to support your workers accessing childcare. So I don't think it's always necessarily more difficult when you're a smaller company, but it is certainly different. So we don't have specific guidance for smaller companies, but we're happy to share again, like the more generic guidance we have, and also encourage you to work with local organizations, and there are support systems out there that help companies if they want to go through that journey.
Thank you, Chris. And is there a database or any chart where we might be able to see the increase of family-friendly policies for the region? Specifically, maybe Kuwait. We have some AmChams also joining us from Lebanon and Oman. So is there any data that we can find on this, especially like after COVID? You're talking about a lot of the companies that flexible, working policies and whatnot. Is this still something that prevails? Because at least here in Kuwait, we have seen somewhat of a decline on the flexible working hours, or being able to work from home, which was applicable during COVID, but it seems that it's not like that anymore for a lot of entities. So we'd love to get more information on that as well.
Erica, do you want to comment on this one if you have
Yeah, I actually don't have information from the company side, if that, on the changes in policies. And we don't, I don't yet have the database, like the full information on the government policies yet either from the study, but hopefully when the study will present what has happened since COVID, basically. And so when we have that, we will be happy to do another chat and share the findings.
And there are some global resources, but again, they look at the more national laws and entitlements. So the ILO has I think it's called the Global Care Portal, that lists sort of what are workers or individuals entitled to in different countries. I somehow don't have access to the chat, otherwise I would just put it in there. But that's also something we can share, so that you can at least get a sense of what's the public policy in different countries at the moment. And as Erica said, I mean, the UNICEF research will also hopefully, precisely aims to do that, not to look at what are the existing laws and gaps. That doesn't look at what companies are doing. That would be very, very difficult to assess, I think, given the vast multitude of companies out there. But at least from the legal and policy point of view, the ILO's Global Care Portal, I think it's called, might be a useful first starting point.
Thank you both. And just one last question. I don't see many on the chat, but in terms of the WEP's principles, right? The women empowerment principles, and how companies can become signatories. Is there a similar standard that UNICEF has where companies can become signatories of, providing good parental policies, kind of like a B Corp certification?
Excellent question. No, there's no certification. We as UNICEF would sort of not provide that. There is also no similar set to the webs that you can sign up to. However, there are the Child Rights and Business Principles, which is a very, very important framework that UNICEF Global Compact and Save the Children developed in 2012. We just had the 10-year anniversary last year, that really outlines what companies can do to integrate children's rights into their business operations and supply chains and business relationships, both in order to respect children's rights, but also in order to support children's rights. So they're not specific to family-friendly policies, although they do mention decent work for parents and caregivers. So they're very, very relevant standards worth looking at. But again, they're not something that companies can sign up to. However, those companies that use them as the reference point, they often do mention that in their sustainability work. So when companies sort of say, okay, we aim to respect international labor standards, we're guided by international human rights standards. And then sometimes companies mention either the WEPs or also the CRBP, the Children's Rights and Business Principles. So it's worth also looking at those. And we have a lot of material again, that helps companies also integrate the CRBP into their business operations, with family-friendly policies being one aspect, because of course there are many, many other aspects how companies can touch the lives of children.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chris. And would you or the team be able to share those links and files with us so that we can share it with the participants after this?
Absolutely. We'll do a quick maybe a reading list or sort of key resources, some links to websites where more material can be accessed. From my side, they're mostly global, but I'm sure that also from the region there might be one or two that could be added.
Perfect. Thank you all so much for your time today. And to the participants, we hope that this was a good informational session for you. So thank you all. If you have any other questions, please do email them to us and we will share it with the UNICEF colleagues. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Paula, and thank you, colleagues.
Thank you.